The precipice of prejudice. The emergency room buzzed with its usual controlled chaos as Dr. Naomi Bennett adjusted her white coat and scanned her clipboard. The cases were a typical mix of fractures, respiratory issues, and minor traumas. Naomi, a skilled physician with years of experience, prided herself on her ability to maintain composure, no matter the situation. But tonight, her patients would be tested like never before. The doors of the ER burst open as paramedics wheeled in a pale, unconscious boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. His small chest rose and fell irregularly, and his face was drained of all color. The medical team snapped into action as one paramedic shouted over the din, "Male, age 7. Severe allergic reaction. Possible anaphylactic shock." Naomi was already moving. "Trauma room 2, she instructed, her voice clear and commanding. "Start him on epinephrine. Prep for intubation if needed. I want a full set of vitals now." A man in a sharp suit stormed in behind the stretcher, his face a mix of panic and fury. His voice boomed through the ER. "That's my son. Is he going to be okay?" "We're doing everything we can," Naomi replied briskly without looking up. Her focus was on the boy. The man's gaze locked on her, narrowing as he processed who she was. "Wait, are you the doctor?" he asked, his tone laced with incredulity. Naomi looked up briefly, meeting his eyes. "Yes, I'm Dr. Bennett. Your son." "No," he interrupted, his voice rising. "Get someone else. I don't want you treating my son." Naomi's hands paused for the briefest of moments before continuing their work. She'd heard this before, though it never failed to sting. "Sir, your son is in critical condition. He needs immediate medical attention." The man's face contorted with rage. "I don't care. I don't want someone like you experimenting on him. Get me a real doctor. Someone competent." The words hung in the air like a slap. Naomi's colleagues froze, their gazes flickering toward her. She felt the humiliation burn through her, but her face remained calm. She straightened, standing tall despite the weight of the moment. "Your son's life is in danger," Naomi said evenly. "If you want him to survive, you'll let me do my job." The man's face turned redder. "If anything happens to him, it's on you," he spat. Naomi didn't respond. She turned her attention back to the boy, blocking out the venom in the man's voice. The child's vitals were dropping. Alarms began to blare, cutting through the tension like a knife. The situation was escalating fast. Heart rates plummeting. A nurse called out. "Prep the defibrillator," Naomi commanded. She glanced at the father, her voice sharp. "Step back now, or I will have security remove you." The authority in her voice stunned the man into silence. He stepped aside, his face a mixture of fury and fear. Naomi grabbed the defibrillator paddles. "Clear," she ordered. The boy's tiny body jolted as electricity coursed through him. Everyone held their breath as the monitor beeped steadily once, then again. A weak rhythm appeared. Relief swept through Naomi, but she didn't let it slow her movements. "Let's stabilize him and move him to the ICU," she said to the team. The boy's father stood frozen, his face pale. He opened his mouth as if to speak but said nothing. Naomi turned to him, her voice calm but icy. "Your son is alive because I didn't let your hatred stop me. Think about that." With that, she turned back to her team and continued the life-saving efforts, leaving the man to grapple with his own shame. Earlier that evening, Naomi had begun her shift with the same routine she had perfected over years of working in high-pressure environments. She greeted her colleagues with a warm smile, reviewed patient charts, and mentally prepared for whatever challenges the night might bring. By all accounts, the evening had started uneventfully. The steady flow of patients kept the ER bustling but manageable. Naomi had just finished treating a child with a minor fracture when the paramedics rushed in with the boy. From the moment she laid eyes on him, her instincts had taken over. She was no stranger to medical emergencies, but there was something about this boy. the way his frail body struggled to cling to life. That struck a chord deep within her. The confrontation with the father was a cruel reminder of the biases she had faced throughout her career, but she refused to let it distract her from her duty. As the boy was wheeled into the ICU, Naomi felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. She knew this was only the beginning of a long night, but she also knew she wouldn't let prejudice, fear, or hate deter her from doing what she did best: saving lives. The question lingered in her mind. Would this be the moment that changed the father's heart? Or would he leave the hospital the same man who had walked in, blinded by his own prejudice? Only time would tell. But for Naomi, the answer didn't matter. Her duty was clear, and she wouldn't let anything, least of all hate, stand in her way. The edge of desperation. The hospital lights glared down on Dr. Naomi Bennett as she leaned over the boy, Tyler. His vitals had stabilized, but the road ahead was uncertain. Every move she made was calculated and precise, her hands moving with the steady rhythm born of years of training and experience. Around her, the team buzzed like a well-oiled machine, their trust in her abilities unshaken. The boy's father, James Aldridge, stood in the hallway outside the ICU, his fists clenched at his sides. His eyes were locked on the floor, a storm of emotions brewing beneath his otherwise stoic exterior. Humiliation, guilt, and a stubborn pride wrestled within him, leaving him paralyzed. He had yelled, insulted, and demanded another doctor. Yet it was this woman, the one he had dismissed as incompetent, who had saved his son's life. Naomi emerged from the ICU, her expression a mask of professional calm. She approached James, her voice even but laced with quiet authority. Your son is stable for now, but we need to monitor him closely over the next 24 hours. He's not out of the woods yet. James looked up at her, his mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. He stammered, then stopped, the weight of his earlier words too heavy to overcome. Naomi met his gaze steadily. I don't need your gratitude, she said firmly. Your son needed help, and I gave it to him. That's what matters. James nodded stiffly, his pride holding him back from saying the words he knew he should. Before he could find his voice, Naomi turned and walked away, her focus already shifting to the next patient who needed her. The night dragged on. Naomi moved from room to room, treating patients with an unwavering dedication. Her mind, however, kept circling back to Tyler. She checked on him frequently, watching as his small body fought to recover. Each beep of the monitor was a small reassurance, a reminder that he was still here, still holding on. As the hours passed, the weight of the day began to settle on her shoulders. The father's words replayed in her mind, each one cutting deeper than she cared to admit. She had faced prejudice before, countless times, but it never became easier. Each encounter left a scar, a reminder of the uphill battle she fought every day to prove herself in a world that often refused to see past her skin. By dawn, Tyler's condition had improved slightly. His vitals were stronger and his breathing more regular. Naomi allowed herself a small moment of relief as she stood at his bedside. She adjusted the blanket around him, her heart aching at how fragile he looked. Dr. Bennett, a nurse said softly, interrupting her thoughts. The father is in the waiting area. He's asking to see you. Naomi straightened, her expression hardening. She didn't relish the thought of another confrontation, but she also wasn't one to shy away from difficult conversations. She nodded and made her way to the waiting room. James was pacing when she arrived, his movements restless and anxious. When he saw Naomi, he stopped abruptly, his eyes flickering with something she couldn't quite place. Shame, perhaps, or gratitude buried beneath layers of pride. How is he? James asked, his voice low. He's stable, Naomi replied, her tone measured. But his recovery will take time. James nodded, his hands fidgeting nervously. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken words. James began, then hesitated. He ran a hand through his hair, his gaze dropping to the floor. I need to apologize. Naomi raised an eyebrow, her arms crossing over her chest. Do you? James flinched at her tone, but forced himself to continue. I was wrong, he admitted, his voice trembling. I let my own biases cloud my judgment. And he faltered, struggling to find the words. I owe you my son's life. Naomi studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Your apology is noted, she said finally. But understand this. Your biases didn't just hurt me. They almost cost your son his life. You need to think about that. James's face paled, the weight of her words sinking in. He nodded slowly, his throat tightening with emotion. You're right, he said quietly. I do. The day unfolded with a tense calm. Tyler continued to improve, and James remained by his side, his earlier bravado replaced by a quiet introspection. Naomi observed him from a distance, noting the subtle shifts in his demeanor. He seemed less rigid, less defensive. Whether it was genuine change or temporary guilt, she couldn't yet tell. By evening, Tyler was awake and alert enough to ask questions. Naomi visited his room, her heart warming at the sight of his small smile. Are you the doctor who saved me? Tyler asked, his voice small but curious. Naomi nodded, a gentle smile on her face. I am. Thank you, Tyler said, his eyes bright. My dad said you were really smart. Naomi chuckled softly. Well, your dad might be right about that. James, who had been sitting in the corner, looked up sharply at her words. His gaze met Naomi's, and for the first time, there was no trace of hostility in his eyes, just a quiet acknowledgement. As Naomi left the room, she felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and lingering frustration. She had done her job, saved a life, helped a family, but the scars of the night's events lingered. She wondered if James' apology marked the beginning of a true transformation, or if it was simply a fleeting moment of gratitude. Only time would tell. For now, though, there was work to be done. The ER was calling, and Naomi knew she couldn't afford to dwell on the past. Lives depended on her, and she would give them nothing less than her best. Fractured trust, fragile bonds. Naomi walked into the pediatric intensive care unit, her eyes immediately landing on Tyler. His frail body was propped up slightly, and he was fiddling with the corner of the blanket draped over him. The monitors beeped steadily, a reassuring rhythm that echoed the fragile progress he had made. Naomi offered him a warm smile as she approached. Good morning, Tyler, she said gently. How are you feeling today? Tyler looked up at her, his big brown eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and gratitude. Better, I think, he replied, his voice still soft. Thank you for helping me. Naomi's smile deepened. You're very welcome. You're a strong little guy, and you're doing great. As she adjusted the IV line and checked his vitals, she noticed Tyler's father, James, sitting in a chair by the window. He looked different today, tired, disheveled, and, for the first time, vulnerable. His hands rested on his knees, his fingers twitching slightly as if wrestling with unspoken thoughts. Dr. Bennett, he said suddenly, his voice breaking the quiet hum of the room. Naomi glanced at him briefly, her expression neutral. Yes. I've been thinking about what you said, James began, his tone hesitant, about how my biases almost cost Tyler his life. Naomi turned fully to face him, crossing her arms. And James exhaled deeply, his shoulders slumping. I want to believe I'm a good father, he admitted, his voice tinged with guilt. But yesterday made me realize I've been teaching Tyler the wrong things, through my actions, my words, my prejudices. Naomi's gaze softened slightly, though her expression remained guarded. Acknowledging it is a start, she said, but change takes more than just words. James nodded, his jaw tightening. I know, and I don't want my son to grow up thinking the way I did. I want to do better, for him. Naomi studied him for a moment, weighing his sincerity. She had seen people like James before, men who clung to their prejudices like a shield, unwilling to confront the discomfort of their own ignorance. But there was something in his tone, in the way his shoulders slumped, that hinted at a genuine desire to change. "Then start by listening," she said finally, "to people, to experiences that are different from your own. And show Tyler, through your actions, what it means to be open-minded and compassionate." James swallowed hard, nodding again. "I'll try." Later that afternoon, Naomi was in the staff lounge, sipping a much-needed cup of coffee, when a nurse approached her. "Dr. Bennett, there's a situation," the nurse said, her voice urgent. Naomi set her cup down immediately. "What is it?" "It's Tyler's father," the nurse explained. "He's in the waiting area with someone from the hospital's legal department. They're arguing." Naomi's brow furrowed as she stood. "Let's go." When she reached the waiting area, she found James standing with his arms crossed, his face flushed with frustration. Across from him stood a woman in a tailored suit, her expression calm but firm. "What's going on here?" Naomi asked, her voice steady but authoritative. The woman turned to her. "Dr. Bennett, I'm Margaret Sullivan from the hospital's legal team. Mr. Aldridge has been expressing concerns about the treatment his son received yesterday." Naomi's jaw tightened as she turned to James. "Concerns?" James shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "Look, I know you saved Tyler," he said, his tone defensive. "But I just wanted to make sure everything was handled properly." Margaret interjected. "He's implying there may have been negligence." Naomi's stomach churned. After everything she had done for Tyler, after enduring James's insults and saving his son's life, this felt like a slap in the face. But instead of letting her anger show, she took a deep breath and kept her tone measured. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, "I assure you that every step we took was necessary and performed with the utmost care. Your son's life was in critical danger, and we acted quickly to save him. If you have specific concerns, I'm more than willing to address them." James hesitated, his face flushing further. "I didn't mean to accuse you," he said finally. I don't know how to handle all of this. It's overwhelming." Naomi studied him, her irritation tempered by a flicker of understanding. She knew fear often masqueraded as anger or blame. Still, she wasn't about to let him undermine her work or her team's efforts. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice firm but calm. "I don't take shortcuts when it comes to my patients. Tyler is alive today because of the decisions we made. If you have doubts, I suggest you speak with the hospital administration and review the medical records." James looked down, his shoulders slumping again. I don't need to do that. I know you did your job. He paused, struggling to articulate his thoughts. "I'm sorry." Margaret raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, watching as the tension in the room slowly dissipated. Naomi nodded curtly, apology accepted. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other patients to attend to." She turned and walked away, her back straight and her head high. But as she made her way down the hall, she couldn't shake the lingering sting of James's actions. Trust was fragile, and his doubts had struck a nerve. That evening, Naomi returned to check on Tyler. The boy was awake and alert, his small hands clutching a coloring book. He looked up as she entered, his face lighting up with a smile. "Hi, Dr. Bennett," he said cheerfully. "Hi, Tyler," Naomi replied, her smile softening. "How are you feeling?" "Better," he said, flipping a page in his book. "The nurses are really nice." Naomi chuckled. "They are, aren't they? You're in good hands." James was sitting in the corner of the room, silent but attentive. He watched as Naomi interacted with Tyler, his expression unreadable. As Naomi finished her checkup, Tyler looked at her with wide eyes. "Are you going to help more kids, Dr. Bennett?" Naomi nodded. "Always." "Will they be okay, like me?" he asked. Naomi's heart ached at his innocent question. "I'll do everything I can to make sure they are." Tyler smiled, his trust in her unshaken. Naomi glanced at James briefly, seeing the conflict in his eyes. She left the room with a renewed determination, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For Naomi, every day was a battle, not just against illness and injury, but against the prejudice and doubt that threatened to overshadow her work. But she refused to let it defeat her, because for every patient like Tyler, and for every parent like James, there was hope for change. And that hope was worth fighting for. A lesson in grace. Naomi's shift had stretched into its second day, with little time to rest. Yet her mind lingered on Tyler and his father, James. The complexity of their situation, the child fighting for his life, and the father battling his own biases, felt heavier than most cases. But Naomi had learned long ago to compartmentalize, to keep her focus on saving lives rather than untangling the mess of emotions and prejudices her patients or their families carried with them. Still, James's apology lingered in her thoughts. Was it genuine? Or was it simply the guilt of a man who had almost lost his child? She had seen many like him before, people who clung to their prejudices even as they relied on the very people they demeaned. Yet there was something in James's demeanor that suggested he was wrestling with himself. As Naomi walked down the brightly lit hospital corridor, a nurse hurried to her side. "Dr. Bennett," the nurse said, a note of urgency in her voice. "Tyler's father is asking for you again. He's in the ICU waiting area." Naomi sighed inwardly, adjusting her white coat. "What now?" she murmured, more to herself than to the nurse. "All right, I'll handle it." In the waiting area, James sat hunched forward on a chair, his elbows resting on his knees. He seemed lost in thought, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his suit jacket. When he saw Naomi approach, he stood abruptly, his expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "Dr. Bennett," he began, his voice quieter than before. I know you're busy, but I needed to talk to you." Naomi raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "What is it, Mr. Aldridge?" James hesitated, glancing at the floor. "I've been sitting here thinking about everything that's happened, about what I said to you, about Tyler. And I realized," his voice trailed off, as if the words were too heavy to articulate. Naomi waited, her expression neutral but patient. "I realized how wrong I've been," he finally said, his voice trembling. "Not just about you, but about people who don't look like me. I let my fear, my ignorance, and my arrogance dictate how I see the world. And it almost cost me my son." Naomi's gaze softened, though she kept her tone steady. "It's good that you've come to that realization, Mr. Aldridge. But acknowledgement is just the first step. Change requires action." James nodded fervently. "I know. And I want to do better. For Tyler's sake, if not for my own. He's watching me, learning from me. And I don't want him to grow up with the same prejudices I've carried." Naomi studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his words. "What do you plan to do about it?" James straightened, his voice gaining strength. "I don't know yet, but I want to start by saying thank you for saving my son, for saving me from myself. And I want to ask if there's any way I can help. Here, at the hospital." Naomi was taken aback. It wasn't often that people like James sought redemption, let alone through service. "What are you suggesting?" "I run a construction company," James explained. "We've worked on community projects before. If there's anything this hospital needs, renovations, expansions, anything, I'd like to help. No cost." Naomi's eyebrows rose. "That's a generous offer, Mr. Aldridge." James shrugged. "It's the least I can do, and I'd like to volunteer, if that's possible. I want Tyler to see that people can change, that they can grow." Naomi's initial skepticism gave way to a flicker of hope. Perhaps James was serious about changing. "I'll pass your offer along to the hospital administration," she said. "And as for volunteering, I'm sure we can find a way for you to contribute." James smiled faintly, the tension in his posture easing. "Thank you." Later that evening, Naomi visited Tyler in his room. He was sitting up in bed, his cheeks regaining a bit of color, and his small hands clutching a stuffed bear. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "Dr. Bennett," he exclaimed, his voice stronger than it had been in days. "Hey there, Tyler," Naomi said warmly. "You're looking much better." "I feel better," Tyler said proudly. "Dad said it's because of you." Naomi chuckled softly. "Well, your body's doing most of the work. I just helped it along." Tyler tilted his head, his expression curious. "Dad said you're really smart. He said I should look up to you." Naomi blinked, caught off guard by the admission. "Did he now?" "Yeah," Tyler said, nodding earnestly. "He said you're a hero." Naomi's heart swelled at the boy's words, but she kept her tone light. "Well, heroes come in all shapes and sizes, Tyler. And you're pretty heroic yourself, being so brave." Tyler beamed, clutching his bear tighter. "Do you think I could be a doctor like you when I grow up?" Naomi crouched beside his bed, her eyes meeting his. "I think you can be anything you want to be, Tyler. And I think you'd make an amazing doctor." As Naomi left Tyler's room, she found James waiting outside. He looked nervous, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "Dr. Bennett," he said, his voice softer than before. "I overheard what you said to Tyler. Thank you. He needs people like you to look up to." Naomi inclined her head. "He's a remarkable kid, and he deserves a father who sets the right example." James nodded, his expression earnest. "I'm trying. I promise." Naomi's gaze lingered on him for a moment before she spoke. "Change is hard, Mr. Aldridge. But if you're serious about this, you'll find a way. And Tyler will see it." James extended his hand, a gesture of both gratitude and respect. Naomi hesitated for a heartbeat before shaking it firmly. That night, as Naomi sat in the staff lounge, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. The day had been exhausting, emotionally and physically, yet there was a sense of fulfillment that came from knowing she had not only saved a life, but perhaps also changed one. James's journey toward redemption was far from over, but it was a start. And for Naomi, that was enough. Because every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. The healing path. Naomi was barely through her first sip of morning coffee when her pager vibrated insistently. The hospital day was starting early and with a sense of urgency. She set her cup down and headed for the Pediatric Intensive Care Unit, PICU. Tyler's name flashing on her pager quickened her pace. The moment she entered the unit, a nurse approached. "Dr. Bennett, Tyler's vitals dipped briefly overnight. He's stable now, but his father's been anxious all morning." Naomi nodded, her mind immediately assessing what could have caused the fluctuation. "Let's check his latest labs and run a full diagnostic panel to be safe." As she made her way to Tyler's room, she saw James sitting outside, his head buried in his hands. The man who had once exuded hostility and arrogance now looked small, fragile even. Naomi hesitated for a moment, then approached him. "Mr. Aldridge," she said, her tone calm but firm. James looked up, his eyes red and tired. "Dr. Bennett." "Is he?" "He's stable," Naomi assured him. "I'm going to take a closer look, but there's no need to panic." James exhaled a long, shaky breath, leaning back in his chair. "I don't know how you stay so calm," he muttered. Naomi offered a faint smile. "Years of practice, and I've learned that panic doesn't help anyone." James nodded, his hands fidgeting in his lap. "I feel so useless," he admitted. "Sitting here, doing nothing, while you and your team do everything." Naomi's gaze softened. "Sometimes, being there is enough. Tyler needs to see you when he wakes up. That's something only you can give him." James swallowed hard and nodded again, his jaw tightening with emotion. Naomi left him to collect himself and stepped into Tyler's room. Tyler was asleep, his small body dwarfed by the machines surrounding him. Naomi checked his chart, reviewing the fluctuations in his vitals from the night before. She carefully examined him, her experienced eyes noting the subtle signs of progress in his recovery. As she adjusted the monitors, Tyler stirred. His eyelids fluttered open, and he blinked up at her groggily. "Dr. Bennett," he mumbled, his voice raspy. "Good morning, Tyler," Naomi said, her voice warm. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," he admitted, his small hand reaching for his stuffed bear. "Is my dad here?" "He's right outside," Naomi said with a reassuring smile. "Do you want me to bring him in?" Tyler nodded weakly. Naomi stepped out of the room to find James still seated, his hands clasped tightly together. "He's awake and asking for you," she said. James stood abruptly, his face lighting up with relief. "Thank you." Naomi followed him into the room, watching as James approached Tyler's bedside. The transformation in James was striking. Gone was the brash, angry man she had encountered on that first chaotic night. Here stood a father, raw and vulnerable, who had been brought to his knees by his love for his son. "Hey, buddy," James said softly, taking Tyler's small hand in his. "How are you doing?" "I'm okay," Tyler whispered. "Dr. Bennett says I'm getting better." James's eyes flickered toward Naomi, gratitude evident in his gaze. "She's the best, isn't she?" Tyler nodded, his lips curving into a faint smile. "She's my hero." Naomi felt a lump form in her throat at the boy's words, but she pushed it aside. There was no room for emotion when there was still work to be done. Later that day, Naomi was reviewing Tyler's updated charts when James approached her outside the room. He looked more composed, but there was a seriousness in his expression that caught her attention. "Dr. Bennett," he began, his voice steady. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Naomi nodded, folding her arms as she waited for him to continue. "I've been thinking a lot," James said, his tone reflective, "about everything that's happened, about how close I came to losing Tyler, and about how wrong I was about you." Naomi said nothing, letting him find his words. "I was raised to believe certain things," James admitted, "to think a certain way about people who didn't look like me, who didn't come from the same world I did. And I carried that with me for too long." He looked down at his hands, as if ashamed. "But watching you, seeing how you cared for Tyler, how you saved his life, it's made me realize how blind I've been. You didn't just save my son. You saved me from myself." Naomi's expression softened, though her voice remained steady. "Acknowledging that is important, but what you do next is what matters most." James nodded. "I know, and I want to change, not just for Tyler, but for myself. I don't want to be the man I was." Naomi studied him for a long moment, weighing his sincerity. "Change isn't easy," she said finally. "It's uncomfortable, and it takes time. But if you're serious, you'll find a way." "I am serious," James said firmly. "And I want to start by giving back. I've already spoken to the hospital about donating to the pediatric unit, and I've reached out to a local community center to see how I can help." Naomi raised an eyebrow, impressed despite herself. "That's a good start." James offered a faint smile. "It's the least I can do." That evening, Naomi visited Tyler one last time before heading home. The boy was sitting up in bed, coloring in a sketchbook. When he saw her, his face lit up. "Hi, Dr. Bennett," he said brightly. "Hi, Tyler," Naomi replied, her smile warm. "How's my favorite patient?" "I'm good," Tyler said, holding up his drawing. It was a crude but heartful depiction of himself, his father, and Naomi standing side by side. Above them, he had scrawled in bright letters, "Thank you, Dr. Bennett." Naomi's heart swelled as she took the drawing from him. "This is beautiful, Tyler. Thank you." "It's for you," he said earnestly, "because you're the best doctor ever." Naomi chuckled softly, ruffling his hair. "You're too kind." As she left the room, she glanced back to see Tyler showing the drawing to his father, who listened intently. The sight filled her with a rare sense of peace. For Naomi, the work was never truly done. There would always be more patience, more challenges, and more battles to fight. But moments like this, when trust was rebuilt, when lives were saved, and when hearts began to heal, made it all worthwhile. She stepped into the corridor, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that the path of healing wasn't just for her patients, but for those willing to grow and learn alongside them. Redemption's horizon. The hospital corridors hummed with their usual blend of urgency and quiet resilience. Naomi walked toward the pediatric intensive care unit, her steps steady despite the weight of the past few days. She had spent countless hours navigating Tyler's critical care and the emotional complexity surrounding his father, James Aldridge. But as she neared the unit, she felt a sense of anticipation. Today felt different, a turning point. Tyler's recovery had progressed well. He was regaining strength, his color returning, and his spirits lifting with every passing day. But Naomi's thoughts were consumed by what lay beyond his physical healing. Would James rise to the challenge of being the father Tyler deserved? Would he truly change, or would his epiphanies fade as the crisis became a memory? Naomi shook off her doubts as she stepped into Tyler's room. The boy greeted her with a broad smile, his cheeks flushed with health. Beside him sat James, his demeanor markedly transformed. He no longer carried the defensiveness and anger that had defined him during their first meeting. Instead, there was a quiet humility in his posture. "Dr. Bennett," Tyler exclaimed, his voice ringing with excitement. "Guess what? I walked to the bathroom today all by myself." Naomi grinned, her heart warming at his enthusiasm. "That's incredible, Tyler. You're getting stronger every day." "Dad says I'm a superhero," Tyler added, puffing out his chest. "Well," Naomi said, crouching to his level, "every superhero needs a great support team. Your dad's been doing a good job, hasn't he?" Tyler nodded eagerly. "He reads to me every night and helps me with my coloring. He's the best." Naomi glanced at James, who met her gaze with a faint smile. There was gratitude in his eyes. Gratitude, but also something deeper, as though he were slowly rediscovering a part of himself he thought he'd lost. Later that morning, Naomi found James waiting for her in the hallway. He looked more composed, his suit neatly pressed, but his hands still fidgeted slightly, a habit she'd come to recognize as a sign of his internal struggle. "Dr. Bennett," he began, his voice steady but earnest, "can we talk?" Naomi nodded, motioning for him to follow her to a quieter area. Once there, James hesitated, as though organizing his thoughts. "I wanted to thank you again," he said finally, "not just for saving Tyler, but for showing me the kind of person I want to be." Naomi raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. "And what kind of person is that?" James sighed, his gaze dropping to the floor. "The kind of person who listens, who learns, who doesn't let ignorance and fear dictate their actions. I've spent my life building walls, walls that kept me from seeing people for who they really are." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "But those walls almost cost me the most important thing in my life, and I'm done living like that." Naomi studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "Acknowledging that is a start," she said. "But change takes more than words, Mr. Aldridge. It takes commitment." "I know," James said firmly. "That's why I've started volunteering at a local community center. I've been working with kids, helping them with after-school programs. And I've been talking to Tyler about what it means to treat everyone with kindness and respect." Naomi's eyes softened, though her tone remained measured. "It sounds like you're on the right path. But don't expect it to be easy. Change is a process, not a destination." James nodded. "I'm ready for that." That afternoon, Naomi met with the hospital's social worker to discuss Tyler's case. The boy was nearing discharge, but there were still logistical and emotional considerations to address. "James has been surprising," Naomi admitted during the meeting. "He's shown real effort and self-awareness. I think he's trying to be a better father, not just for Tyler but for himself." The social worker nodded, making notes on her tablet. "That's good to hear. Tyler's well-being depends on his father's ability to provide a stable and nurturing environment. It sounds like James is committed to that." "He is," Naomi said. "But I also think Tyler needs continued support, counseling, perhaps to help him process everything he's been through. "We can arrange that," the social worker agreed. "And we'll check in with the family regularly to ensure they're on track." Naomi felt a sense of relief. For the first time, she believed that Tyler and James had a real chance at a better future. The day of Tyler's discharge arrived with a mix of joy and bittersweet goodbyes. Naomi stood by as the nurses helped him into a wheelchair, his bear clutched tightly in his arms. James hovered nearby, his protective instincts in full force. "Dr. Bennett," Tyler said, looking up at her with wide, grateful eyes. "I'm going to miss you." Naomi crouched beside him, her smile warm. "I'll miss you too, Tyler. But you're going to do great. And if you ever need me, you know where to find me." Tyler nodded solemnly, then reached into his bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I made this for you." Naomi unfolded the paper to reveal a crayon drawing of herself in a superhero cape, standing beside Tyler and James. Above them, in big, colorful letters, he had written, "Thank you for saving my family." Naomi felt a lump rise in her throat, but she kept her smile steady. "This is beautiful, Tyler. I'm going to hang it in my office." James stepped forward, his voice quiet but resolute. "Dr. Bennett, I owe you more than I can ever repay. You didn't just save Tyler's life. You changed mine. And I promise you, I won't waste that second chance." Naomi looked at him, her expression softening. "Then make it count, Mr. Aldridge. For Tyler and for yourself." James nodded, his jaw tightening with emotion. He extended his hand, and Naomi shook it firmly, the gesture symbolizing not just gratitude, but a shared commitment to the path ahead. As Naomi watched them leave the hospital, she felt a rare sense of peace. Tyler's journey was far from over, and James's path to redemption would undoubtedly be fraught with challenges. But for the first time, she believed they would face those challenges together, with resilience and grace. The hospital's intercom crackled, pulling Naomi from her thoughts. A new emergency was en route, a multi-car collision with multiple injuries. Naomi adjusted her stethoscope and headed toward the ER, her steps steady, her focus sharp. Because the work never stopped, and neither would she. For every life saved, for every heart change, she would be there, steadfast, unyielding, and ready for whatever came next. The journey forward. Naomi returned to the bustling ER, her mind focused on the next wave of patients. The hospital was a constant reminder of life's fragility and resilience. Every patient she treated, every life she touched, left a mark on her, a reminder of why she had chosen this path. As she worked through the chaos of the multi-car collision, her hands steady and her mind sharp, Naomi's thoughts occasionally drifted back to Tyler and James. Their story was a small, yet profound victory in a sea of challenges. But Naomi knew that victories like these were what kept her grounded, fueling her resolve to face the next case, the next family, and the next set of prejudices that might walk through the hospital doors. Hours later, as the ER quieted and the patients were stabilized or transferred, Naomi finally allowed herself a moment of rest. She leaned against the counter, her stethoscope hanging loosely around her neck, and closed her eyes briefly. "Dr. Bennett," a nurse called softly, interrupting her brief reprieve. "There's someone here to see you." Naomi straightened, her brow furrowing slightly. "Who is it?" The nurse smiled. "Tyler and his father." Naomi stepped into the waiting area and was surprised to see James standing there with Tyler in tow. Tyler looked healthier than she'd ever seen him, his cheeks rosy and his energy vibrant. He grinned when he saw Naomi, clutching the small bouquet of flowers in his hands. "Dr. Bennett," Tyler called, rushing toward her. Naomi crouched down to his level as he handed her the flowers. "These are for you," he said, "because you're the best doctor ever." Naomi's heart swelled as she accepted the bouquet. "Thank you, Tyler. These are beautiful." James approached, his expression one of quiet gratitude. "We wanted to stop by and say thank you," he said, properly this time. Naomi straightened, her gaze meeting James. "You've already thanked me, Mr. Aldridge." "Not enough," James said firmly. "You didn't just save Tyler. You gave us a second chance. A chance to be better, to do better. And I'll never forget that." Tyler tugged at Naomi's sleeve. "Dad's been helping at the community center," he said excitedly. "He's teaching kids how to build things." Naomi smiled, glancing at James. "That's good to hear. Sounds like you're making good on your promise." James nodded. "I am. And I'll keep making good on it." Naomi placed a hand on Tyler's shoulder. "You've got a great dad, Tyler. And he's lucky to have you, too." Tyler beamed, and James's eyes glistened with emotion. For a moment, the three of them stood there, the weight of the past few days lingering but no longer oppressive. It had been a journey of pain, healing, and growth. A journey that wasn't over, but was heading in the right direction. As James and Tyler left the hospital, Naomi watched them go, a rare sense of closure settling over her. Their story was a testament to the power of resilience, empathy, and the capacity for change. It reminded her that even in the face of prejudice and adversity, there was always hope. The intercom crackled again, signaling the arrival of another emergency. Naomi adjusted her stethoscope and turned back toward the ER. The work never stopped, but neither did the moments of triumph, however small or fleeting they might seem. And as she walked into the next challenge, Naomi carried Tyler's drawing in her pocket, a simple, colorful reminder of why she kept going. For every life saved, for every heart change, and for every chance to make the world just a little better, Naomi would always answer the call. The journey continued as it always did, and Naomi was ready, always ready.